He does this ad for that. It must have been live, I guess. He hired somebody to climb into a huge chicken suit. Okay.
Okay.
And this very tall gentleman stood beside the man talking, dancing, turning around and spinning and this and that. And the guy talking said, "Come on down. We got hot dogs. We got hamburgers. Bring the kids. There's chips for them and this and that. You'll have a great time. And your credit, doesn't matter if you have bad credit, no credit." And he's firing all these suggestions. And well, what actually was happening on the other end? People who were watching it were transfixed on this chicken, and you're like, why is there a chicken dancing in a TV commercial? So they're focusing, and it put them in a hypnotic state.
Right.
So they're looking at this, and he's the Barker there's putting all these messages about come on down, buy these great cars, we've got a deal for you, and that helped bypass the critical faculty with watching the chicken. And his selective thinking was what the guy was saying.
Right.
And they all went in, and he found that his sales went up 125% or something like that when he did this.
So in fact, perhaps in a nefarious way, much of advertising, perhaps not consciously planned, but is an attempt to bypass that critical faculty.
Right.
And replace the judgment of the advertiser with the judgment of the audience. So an advertiser may say, you need to have this particular form of insurance. Otherwise, you're not protected. A disaster may happen. Many of us have experienced the fact that we'll walk into stores, and I have a particular favourite store that I go into, and it's amazing how many times I discover that things that I thought I had absolutely no need for at all, as soon as I see them on the shelves, I must have that gadget or I must have that thing.
Right.
And once again, there is an attempt to bypass the critical faculty. And we convince ourselves that we should buy it right there and then because there's been a price reduction, it's a special deal, there's a limited selection of them. All of these things are an attempt to replace our judgment with the judgment of somebody else to motivate us to take a particular action.
Well, like I saw one a few years back that was for a commercial. They say, Carrie's a young wife who's 40 and this and that, got a kid, this and that. People of that age and everything are saying, that's like me.
Right.
That's like me. and then they start talking about some of the bad things that can happen and how you need this insurance. And because you're transfixed on that and going, yeah, that's like me and it's that, it kind of bypasses it.
Right.
And those messages, boy, this is something I need.
Right.
And they go in and you go, I better do something.
Right.
And actually you may even feel an emotional reaction inside.
Sure.
Do that fear might come up inside you, right? I better get this right away because if something happens to me and so forth. So that they're getting to your subconscious because that's where all those emotions are.
Yeah, we see this. This has happened every time there's an announcement about a snowstorm or some other weather. You go to the stores and they're empty of milk, bread, other essentials. People have formulated the judgment that if they don't stock up on these things, perhaps providing themselves with 2 weeks of supply, the store's being shut for a day or two is going to render them starving or helpless without the necessary elements of life.
Yeah.
And again, once again, there's been a substitution of selective thinking.
Right.
And again, that's not the same as making a sensible provision for something.
Right, because if a hurricane's coming in, yes, you want 2 weeks worth of supplies, water and things like this.
Right.
But a snowstorm in the Northeast, it gets cleaned up so easily.
Right.
But it is odd that people will buy all this bread, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very strange. But it happens every time.
Of course.
It happens every time. And the selective thinking there is you better prepare for a couple weeks.
Yeah, otherwise disaster.
Right, disaster's going to happen. I'm going to be starving, even though if you think conscious about it, no, they're going to have the streets cleared in a day. You don't need that much.
So we've spoken a lot about the negative effects of waking hypnosis or the detrimental or perhaps the humorous effects, but let's now focus on some of the more positive effects. So one of the ones that I'd like to focus on first is what you're seeing right now, which I call a form of performance enhancement. One of the things that we teach to performers, and when I say performers, people who need to perform a particular task, it could be a sports person, it could be a musical performer, a dramatic performer, or it could even be somebody who wants to do their job very, very well. For example, a surgeon in surgery is, we say, performing surgery. He wants or she wants to be able to perform that surgery to the best of their ability. And my suggestion is, and this is a waking suggestion,
yeah.
not hypnosis. My suggestion is those are best performed in a hypnotic state, in a state of waking hypnosis.
Right.
Why? From the perspective of our model, the state of waking hypnosis is where the conscious and the subconscious mind are acting in harmony. And in that condition, the skills that one has learnt and developed are most accessible in that moment.
Right.
So one has the combination of being present in the moment. Let's take the opposite, where one is constantly worried about whether one's going to perform, or nervous about the possibility, or doubtful about the possibility. What's the selective thinking that's going on there? The selective thinking is simply that I can't do this.
Right.
Or I could do this well in rehearsal, but I couldn't possibly do it that well in performance because I never do. Or other forms of selective thinking, unless I'm very, very nervous, I'm not going to perform. Or if I'm too nervous, I'm not going to perform.
Right.
Or if I'm not keyed up, or if I'm not properly rested. For example, one of the things that sports people and boxers particularly were told, as I understand it, if they had sex the night before, the day before, even the week before their match, they wouldn't have the necessary energy and stamina to continue in what they needed to do. Sports people have been told this for years. I don't think there's any basis in that whatsoever.
Right.
Nobody has ever been able to establish that sexual abstinence causes an increase in performance. So for those of you that believe that, I hope that comes as a source of relief for you.
Right. So one of the things I want to talk about for a second, as an example,
Yes.
that you and I both know from our departed friend Stephen Parkhill,
Yes.
was one of the best hypnotists in the world. Unfortunately, he's passed us. He told us a story about a race car driver.
Yes.
And the race car driver would find that they're racing against a lot of the same people all the time,
Right.
in different races. He'd always come in X seconds
Right.
behind this one other guy.
Right.
It just didn't matter. And and he was a good driver.
Right.
And so forth. And so the question was, well, why is that, right? It probably was a suggestion in his deep subconscious that, he's second best or whatever,
Right.
this guy. But what did he actually do? Well, he gave him a suggestion, and it became effective while he's driving. And I
Right.
think it was, what was it exactly?
I find grip and turn it into speed.
I find grip and turn it into speed.
Sorry, Stephen, that was one of your secrets. I just gave it away on the air.
Right. So now he's teaching this guy, he gives him that suggestion, right? And he's teaching this guy basically to drive in a hypnotic state,
Right.
eyes open. Now, the audience would say, oh, that's crazy. How can you drive in a hypnotic state? But this is a great example that I actually love, is if you go to, say, the mall,
Mm-hmm.
and you start daydreaming, but you make a left, you make a right, you stop at stop signs, you do this, you do that, and you're not even thinking about it. You're just thinking, all of a sudden you arrive at the mall.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't thinking about where to turn or anything like that. Well, if you weren't thinking about it, who was driving the car,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, it's your subconscious, okay? So what actually is happening when you are learning to drive? You know how you're very jerky, you're not very good at it. That's because you're having to use your conscious mind because it hasn't trained the subconscious yet.
Right.
And the whole process of learning to drive is training those things into you in your subconscious automatically. That's
Right.
why you could daydream, because your subconscious takes over and drives.
Right.
So all he was doing is teaching this guy to do what is inherently natural. And it's like you said before about the conscious and the subconscious being aligned and having access to all those tools. He's just clearing away the things that would say, I can't do this.
Well, and now this touches on two very important elements that both relate to waking hypnosis and hypnosis in general. When Stephen Parkhill and other good hypnotists work with people to enhance their sports performance or their musical performance, the dramatic performance, or their performance on the job, as in the case of a surgeon or other highly skilled and technical person, there's a number of factors that have to be present. So, for example, Bill gave that example of where there was a subconscious idea in that particular racing driver that he was always going to be second best.
Right.
Now, no amount of waking hypnosis
Right.
in and of itself is going to overcome that.
Right.
What has to happen in that instance is there had to be deep hypnosis, and that idea a fixed idea which forms a program linked to an emotion has to be expunged from that individual.
Right, first.
Yes, because
Right.
that forms his glass ceiling.
Right.
Because otherwise, any suggestion that we give is going to run up against that which forms his personal definition, the idea being, I'm second best, and it's only safe if I continue to be second best.
Right.
And anything that gives him the notion that he might not be, he might be the best, or he might win, is going to literally, to his subconscious mind, be a threat to his very existence. And it won't be accepted. And so the suggestion or the waking hypnosis will fail in that instance.
This is a very, very, very important concept, not only for this, just for hypnosis in general.
Yes.
Okay. Is that if you've got those deep messages that are giving you a negative message like that, is, direct suggestion hypnotists will go in and try to paper over that with just positive suggestions.
Correct.
It might help temporarily a bit
Right.
and this and that, but like you say, eventually, and most times pretty quickly, it runs up against those negative messages and says, that's not safe to be first.
Right.
I must be second. And it sounds crazy. What would be the reason why I have to be second is safe? We can go deeply into that, but we won't at this point. But that's what they're running up against, and that takes precedence.
Yes.
And the safety takes precedence. And so that's exactly with anything we do now. We always, if we're doing deep regression, we have to go in and change those fixed ideas that are not correct, that are holding the person back.
Right.
And then we give the positive direct suggestions.
Right.
So that's actually what's going on in with that driver and so forth. So yeah.
So what Steve would do is he'd be working with somebody on those things, but to have a practical tool to stimulate what they'd done in hypnosis previously. He gave them particular what we call post-hypnotic anchors, but ways of entering a deep hypnotic state instantly with the eyes open, so that the conscious and subconscious mind acts in harmony. Now, if I was to drive a racing car in a hypnotic state, it would be a disaster. I barely get it around the track because I haven't been trained to do that. If I was in a hypnotic state and I'm on a concert platform playing a piece of classical music on the piano, I would be thrown off within about a few seconds because I don't play the piano.
Yeah, exactly.
So the hypnotic state is not a replacement for learning. It's an adjunct to ensure that whatever has been learned and can be learned is available in its finest form at that moment of time. So the surgeon performs a surgeon as best he can. The pianist performs as best as she can. The racing driver as well as they can. And this is what Stephen Parkhill and other good hypnosis practitioners use to enhance the performance of sports people and others using a combination of deep trance hypnosis, regression to cause as well, and waking hypnosis.
Right, exactly. So one of the examples I've talked about on the show before is backing my boat in.
Oh, an excellent example.
Right, and so what I had this one boat for years, and I have a particularly difficult situation. My driveway goes down, but then I have to curve it around to get it next to the garage. So you just can't back a boat straight in. And then there was a rock wall, so you could only turn so much, the wheel so much, and so forth. So it's very hard to back this in, and I was pretty good at straight line things, but this was difficult. And I would do it over and over again. Over the years, I'd back it in, and it would take me 6, 7, 8 tries. Get very, very frustrating, till I back it in. Nope, that didn't make it. I do this, I do that. Never could get it, so I could do this easily. Then I learned hypnosis, and what I did is, first because I hadn't been successful already, really, first I had to train myself in what does success look like. So what I did is put myself in an eyes open hypnotic state and backed it in. And I didn't worry about whether I was going to make it or not. I backed it till if it wasn't going to make it, I'd stop. I'd pull it back up again, and I'd back it in again. And most of the time, I wouldn't make it, and then I'd make one in. The ones I didn't make were just as important because my mind was recording what it looks like that it shouldn't be doing, right? And then what it looks like when it is going to work.
Right.
And I did it 100 times, and then I took a break, and then I did it 100 more times. That was the training part of it.
And did you do that learning in the hypnotic state?
Learning in the hypnotic state,
right?
So I put myself in eyes open and did that. That was the learning part. Then what I would do is, since now that was all trained into me, what's it going to look like when I fail? What's it going to look like when I succeed?
Yes.
Then when I went to back it in again, I would put myself in a hypnotic state. I probably could do it without even doing it because I've trained it in. But I put myself in that hypnotic state, eyes open again, and I'd back it in. And what I found, I could nail it virtually every single time.
Right.
And that was because, and the big thing is, I wasn't judging it.
Right.
Because when I used to get frustrated too, I go, I'm not making it. Oh, this is so frustrating. Keeping myself in a hypnotic state kept those kind of things away too, and just allowed me to access all that data I'd put in, what it looks like, and I could do it first time, almost every time after that.
So Bill is I mean, what you described there is extremely important, and for the benefit of those watching us, I want to comment a little bit on some of the things that you said.
Right.
Because what Bill has described is two very important elements of hypnosis and waking hypnosis. One is the capacity to enhance his learning ability.
Right.
He used a hypnotic state, and I strongly suggest using the hypnotic state for you to enhance your learning ability. If you're learning a new skill, practicing a skill that you want to improve and enhance, my suggestion is bring yourself into a hypnotic state first. If you're a student going to a class and you want to absorb the material more effectively,
Right.
bring yourself into a hypnotic state. So the uses of the hypnotic state are very numerous. So here we have an enhancement of learning capability, but then following that, we're using the state to enhance our performance capability.
Very good point, yeah.
In this instance, the performance of backing your boat trailer
Right.
into the space
Right.
next to your house reserved for it.
Right.
And in the same way, that's what you would use to enhance performance. So when we talk about performance, we mean it in this full sense of what you do. Here you see the utility of waking hypnosis.
Right.
And it's far better than the opposite state where the overall idea might be, I can't do this, I'm not doing this very well, it's really bad, what's happening? This becomes the selective thinking.
Right.
So now you've got the example of you learning something in a hypnotic state using waking hypnosis and performing in that hypnotic state too.
This is really interesting. And it's actually something I hadn't thought about before. But I'm sure you're right that because I had done it so many times unsuccessfully, when I went to back it in again the next time, I'm sure that there was the idea inside, okay, this is going to be hard.
Yes.
This is going to be difficult.
Right.
And it almost told me to fail.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so how did I change that negative thinking? I'm going to fail, right? Never really thought about this before. But I didn't go in and give myself suggestions and take that out. I think what I really did though is inherently changed it. Because when I went to train myself, I set aside all worries. I knew it didn't matter if I failed or didn't fail. I just knew I needed to record the data, what it looks like when it works and what it looks like when it doesn't.
Right.
And so inherently, I was no longer worried about whether I wasn't going to make it. So those fixed ideas, I'm not going to make it, just weren't relevant.
And this touches on another aspect of hypnosis, which we always talk about, which hypnosis is goal-oriented. There's a very clear goal. The goal is to back the boat trailer into that space.
Right.
There's no doubt. Bill doesn't have to sit there and think, I've got to back into the space, I've got to do it now. He just formulates the intention. This is where it has to go.
Right.
Now, the formulation of the intention following a hypnotic process gives the goal-oriented subconscious mind something to do. Now, if Bill was to say, I'm going to make this trailer lift up into the air spontaneously and drop itself into space by the power of my mind, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Because obviously that's an absurd example, but one of the things I want to illustrate is hypnosis can only make happen what is possible.
Right.
Now, the range of what is possible is much greater than we commonly think.
Right.
And here I want to bring a use of waking hypnosis onto something which we've talked about on other shows, but how it relates to anesthesia. On the last show we talked about self-anesthesia, and we've talked about many things. And hypnosis is very powerful in the use of self-anesthesia, and waking hypnosis is a state that is of great potential value to doctors, dentists, medical practitioners, paramedics, those in the emergency room, because very, very quickly they can bypass the critical faculty and give suggestions which are to the benefit of their patients, including ones for anesthesia where they have to perform certain procedures.
Right.
I read a marvellous example, again, mentioned by Ullman, but it's a well-known example, comes from the Second World War, in which soldiers were being taken from the front and treated for battle wounds. And the surgeons treating them were using at the time nitrous oxide as a form of chemical anaesthesia to help with the pain. And then one of them noticed that the tank of nitrous oxide was empty and had been empty for at least an hour.
Right.
So the people who were being operated upon were being operated upon under the belief that they were being anaesthetised. But that isn't the most important thing. In some ways, the most important thing was that the surgeons absolutely believed, without any shadow of a doubt,
Right.
that those people were anaesthetised.
Right.
And so that combination of the conveying, what happened there? The selective thinking of the patients became that of the surgeons. I am anaesthetised. I will feel no pain.
And vice versa.
And vice versa.
Right. The doctor's saying,
No
you
doubt.
won't feel, we're telling the patient, you'll be fine. You won't feel
Right.
anything from this. That certainty and that suggestion to the patient gave them that same thing.
And the reason that they could do that is because the body and mind working in harmony does have the capacity to create anaesthesia. It's something that we have seen described on previous shows, that's been reported about, that's still done to this day for all sorts of procedures, even major ones. There are examples of, we've talked about before on the show, of deep abdominal surgery being done without any chemical anaesthesia
Right.
at all.
Right.
So these are things that are possible for the body and mind acting in harmony to do.
It sounds fantastical that could actually work.
Now,
But there's a basic inherent in our design
Yes.
that who knows why it's
Right.
designed in, but that we're able to anesthetize certain parts
Yeah.
if you know
what to do.
how. Right.
Now the interesting fact of that Second World War story is this. Now the doctors have discovered that there is no more nitrous oxide, but they still have patients to deal with, many of them. So one said to the other, better not tell them,
Right.
and they continued, right? So as long as they maintain the belief in themselves as well as in the patients that it continued, and this comes to a very, very, very important idea of waking hypnosis, one of the key ideas, is that the mind has to be locked around a specific idea for it to be effective. And of course, it has to be locked around an idea that is capable of being true. Once
Right.
again, an absurd example, but I give it to illustrate the point. I may get to the edge of the building and lock my mind around the idea that I can flap my arms and fly off into the air. It doesn't matter how much I lock my mind around that idea, it's not happening.
Right.
Because laws of nature prevent that from happening.
Right.
But if I'm able to lock my mind around an idea which is capable of happening, as in the example of self-anaesthesia, we can produce self-anaesthesia. And this is one of the things that we use in showing women how they can enjoy a pain-free childbirth
Right.
without the use of any chemical anaesthesia,
Right.
with their eyes open.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So these are some of the very, very powerful uses of waking hypnosis.
And some of the other ones are that again are real positive, and doctors have seen this, is that they've seen where if a patient's brought into the emergency room, maybe they've been in a bad car accident and so forth, a lot of times they'll say, oh, he's okay, you know, he'll do fine, he's going to make it. And what they find is the patient starts responding immediately.
Right.
You never want to say, oh, he's in bad shape, even if the patient's not conscious.
Right.
You know, but they find that they respond, and it's because the person wants the selective thinking, and they say it with, you know, a certainty, and that is a very positive aspect of waking hypnosis
Right.
use. And that's why it's really important for them. And I've seen this is where they say that, yeah, you don't say anything if they're not going to make you. Certainly don't say that.
Yes, and you say, and so for example, again, the person that we've mentioned before, Dabney Ewing with burns, a doctor. When people come in with burns, he tells them very firmly that we've dealt with this many times before, and if you follow our directions, you're going to be okay. You're going to be in good shape.
Right.
And he reinforces that consciously and subconsciously. So their judgment becomes his judgment. I'm going to be okay. These procedures are going to work for me.
Right.
I will heal. I will be safe.
Right.
That's what he puts in, and what happens is body and mind responds, and so therefore when he gives a further suggestion, this area of where the burn was is going to become cool, then they don't get those secondary burns, that
Right.
secondary inflammation, which is the cause of most of the pain and discomfort.
Which the secondary inflammation is terrible. I never understood that, before I read that. And there's the initial tissue damage, but then your body tries to help and it does the wrong thing and sends all these agents in and actually creates a secondary burn that's so much worse.
Right.
And I just recently had that happen to me, which I didn't use Dabney's method. I should have.
So here's the thing. Unfortunately, inadvertently, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and others in the medical profession do give suggestions.
Right.
They do give them, and they do inculcate and produce a state of waking hypnosis, but without knowing it.
Right.
They say things like, "This is going to pinch your skin, or you'll feel some pain, but I'll make it as easy for you as possible." And what happens? People feel pain. Right. People feel that pinch. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and other hypnosis practitioners try to do, is to introduce some of these simple methods of waking hypnosis to the medical profession, so that they can use these very simple techniques in their surgery, in their offices, in the field, and in that way make their lives and the lives of their patients easier and healthier. And it's so simple to do.
Right.
But the first thing that they have to do is understand the essential principles of hypnosis. Then they'll understand why certain words and actions are so much more beneficial than others.
Right.
So it's not just a question of them learning just a few words, it's a question of them learning to understand why they are using those words and what these states of hypnosis, waking suggestion,
Right.
and trance hypnosis are, and what the difference is, and where one is of value and usable and the other is not.
Right, exactly. The thing about it is you're not just convincing the patient.
Correct.
Because if you're just doing it within a conscious state, you can't wish away pain in that way. But
Correct.
But when you can get them into a hypnotic state, or they're naturally in one, yes, you can use the suggestions to
And
make
the
things comfortable.
Key to that state is something which we've mentioned on the show before: somnambulation.
Right.
Somnambulism in the sense that we mean it and describe it. In that somnambulistic state, people are able to find that they can generate self-anesthesia.
Right.
Without that, they won't.
They won't.
So
Exactly.
simple.
Yep.
So we hope that's been useful to you as an introduction to some of the uses of waking hypnosis, and has hopefully in our discussion opened your mind up as to what hypnosis is, how some of these seemingly inexplicable phenomena are explicable. So we hope that you will find a way to find hypnosis to help you, as we'll help you and other practitioners as well. So this is Neil Myers,